Hey everyone, Galib here. Today we're going to talk about Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's ideas on reservations. He was a really important guy who helped create India's constitution. Now, reservations are a complicated issue that people have different opinions about. But if we want to understand why they exist and what they're supposed to do, we need to understand Ambedkar's point of view. He believed reservations could help create a fairer India for everyone, especially for groups of people who haven't been treated fairly for a long time. So, let's dive in and learn more about this important part of Dr. Ambedkar's work. To get why Ambedkar felt so strongly about reservations, we need to go back in time to when the caste system was really powerful in India. The caste system was a rigid social hierarchy that dictated every aspect of a person's life, from their occupation to their social interactions. It was deeply ingrained in the fabric of Indian society and had been for centuries. Imagine a world where you couldn't choose your job, your friends, or even where you could live just because of the family you were born into. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience, it was a system that controlled every aspect of life and kept people in their place from birth to death. The caste you were born into determined your entire future, often condemning people to a life of poverty and social exclusion. That was life for many people, and Dr. Ambedkar, who himself faced discrimination because of his caste, wanted to change that. Born into a Dalit family, Ambedkar experienced firsthand the harsh realities of caste-based discrimination. Despite these challenges, he pursued education relentlessly, eventually earning multiple doctorates and becoming a prominent lawyer and social reformer. He saw reservations not as a way to give some people special treatment, but as a way to make up for the bad things that happened in the past. Ambedkar believed that reservations were a necessary step to level the playing field and provide opportunities to those who had been systematically oppressed for generations. He argued that without such measures, the cycle of discrimination and poverty would continue unabated. It was like saying sorry and trying to fix things for the people who were treated unfairly for such a long time, especially the Dalits, who were treated the worst. The Dalits, often referred to as untouchables, were subjected to the most severe forms of discrimination and social ostracism. They were denied basic human rights and were often forced to live on the outskirts of villages, away from the so-called higher castes. Imagine being told you couldn't even drink water from the same place as someone else just because of your caste. This wasn't just about social exclusion, it was about denying people their basic human dignity. Such practices were not only dehumanizing but also perpetuated a sense of inferiority among the oppressed castes. That's how bad it was. The caste system was a deeply entrenched social order that justified and perpetuated inequality and injustice. It created a society where people were judged not by their abilities or character, but by the circumstances of their birth. Ambedkar believed reservations could help break this cycle of unfairness. He envisioned a society where everyone had the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their caste. Reservations in education and employment were seen as tools to empower the marginalized and provide them with the means to improve their socioeconomic status. By making sure everyone had a chance to get an education, find good jobs, and be a part of the government, he thought India could become a place where everyone had a real chance to succeed, no matter their caste. Education was particularly important to Ambedkar, as he believed it was the key to breaking the chains of caste-based oppression. He wanted to ensure that future generations would not have to suffer the same injustices he had faced. Ambedkar's dream was for an India where everyone was treated equally and judged by their character, not their caste. He envisioned a nation where social justice prevailed, and every individual had the opportunity to reach their full potential. His vision was not just about legal equality, but also about creating a society where people genuinely respected and valued each other. He wanted everyone to have a fair chance to succeed. Ambedkar's legacy continues to inspire millions, reminding us that the fight for social justice and equality is ongoing. His work laid the foundation for a more inclusive and equitable India, but it is up to us to carry forward his vision and ensure that every individual, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to thrive. Now, it's important to know that Ambedkar didn't think reservations should last forever. He envisioned them as a stepping stone towards a more equitable society. He saw them as a temporary solution, like a band-aid on a wound. Just as a band-aid helps protect and heal a wound, reservations were meant to protect and uplift marginalized communities. You need the band-aid until the wound heals, but eventually, you don't need it anymore. Ambedkar believed that once society healed from the deep scars of caste discrimination, reservations would no longer be necessary. He hoped that one day, India would be so fair and equal that reservations wouldn't be needed anymore. His vision was of a nation where everyone had equal opportunities regardless of their background. When he wrote the Constitution, he even put a time limit on reservations, just 10 years. This was a bold move, reflecting his optimism and belief in the potential for rapid social change. He thought that would be enough time to make things better. Ambedkar believed that within a decade, significant progress could be made towards eradicating caste-based inequalities. He wanted to check regularly if reservations were still needed or if things had improved enough. This periodic review was crucial to ensure that the measures were still relevant and effective. His goal wasn't to divide people with reservations but to create a society where everyone was treated the same. He envisioned a future where the caste system would be a thing of the past. Ambedkar knew that true equality meant getting rid of the caste system altogether, not just switching who was treated badly. He fought tirelessly for a society where caste no longer dictated one's destiny. His dream was for a society where people were judged by who they were on the inside, not by their caste. A society where merit and character were the true measures of a person's worth. Ambedkar believed that education was super important, like a key that could unlock a better future, especially for those who had been left behind. He saw how education could help people learn and grow, but he also knew that many people, especially Dalits, weren't even allowed to go to school. And even if they could, they were often treated poorly. Ambedkar himself experienced this, so he knew how unfair it was. He argued that it wasn't enough to just let everyone into schools and jobs. There needed to be a system to make sure everyone had a fair chance. So he suggested reserving spots in schools and government jobs for Dalits. This way, they could get the education and opportunities they deserved. This wasn't about giving anyone special treatment, but about making sure everyone had a seat at the table and a chance to succeed. Ambedkar also knew that for things to truly change, the people who had been treated unfairly needed a voice in the government. He was acutely aware that without representation, the marginalized communities would continue to be overlooked, and their issues would remain unaddressed. Ambedkar's vision was not just about inclusion but about active participation in the democratic process. He understood that the laws and rules made by the government affected everyone, so it was important for everyone to have a say. This was a fundamental principle of democracy that Ambedkar championed. He believed that a truly democratic society could only be achieved when every section of the population had a voice in the legislative process. Imagine if all the laws were made by people who had never experienced hardship, who didn't understand what it was like to be treated unfairly. Such a scenario would lead to laws that are disconnected from the realities of the most vulnerable sections of society. Ambedkar wanted to ensure that the voices of those who had faced discrimination and injustice were not just heard, but were influential in shaping the laws. Ambedkar wanted to change that. He envisioned a system where the marginalized could participate in governance and policy making. This was a radical idea at the time, but Ambedkar was determined to make it a reality. He suggested that some seats in the government should be reserved for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. This was a groundbreaking proposal aimed at ensuring that these communities had guaranteed representation in the legislative bodies. This meant that Dalit leaders could be elected and speak up for their communities. It was a step towards empowering these communities and giving them a platform to voice their concerns and aspirations. This wasn't just about having a few Dalit leaders, it was about making sure their voices were heard when important decisions were made. Ambedkar's vision was to create a more inclusive and equitable society where the marginalized had a significant role in governance. It was about giving them the power to shape their own future. Ambedkar believed that true empowerment came from having the ability to influence policies and decisions that affected their lives. Ambedkar believed that this was super important to protect the rights of marginalized communities and make sure their needs were met. He saw political representation as a crucial tool for social justice and equality, ensuring that the voices of the oppressed were not just heard, but were instrumental in shaping the future of the nation. Chapter 5. Challenging the myth of merit, social equality over privilege. One big argument against reservations is that it's not fair to people who work hard and deserve things based on their own merit. They say it's like giving someone a prize just because of their caste, not because they earned it. But Ambedkar saw things differently. He said that the idea of merit itself is flawed, especially in a society where some people start the race way ahead of others. Think about it. If you grow up in a family with money and resources, you're going to have a much easier time succeeding than someone who has to struggle for everything. Ambedkar believed that we need to make sure everyone has a fair chance from the start. He thought that was more important than sticking to a narrow idea of merit that didn't consider the challenges some people face. Chapter 6. Beyond Reservations: Annihilating Caste, Empowering Individuals. It's really important to remember that while Ambedkar fought for reservations, he always saw them as a temporary fix. His big dream was to get rid of the caste system completely. He knew that if reservations weren't implemented carefully, they could actually end up making people focus on caste differences even more. Ambedkar's vision was a society where no one cared about caste, where people were judged by their character and actions, not their birth. He believed in things like intercaste marriage and educating people about the harms of the caste system. He thought these things would help create a more equal and just society. Ambedkar's hope was that one day, India would be so fair and equal that we wouldn't need reservations anymore. Chapter 7. Guarding Against Misuse, Ensuring Benefits Reach the Most Marginalized. Ambedkar was a practical man, and he knew that even with good intentions, things could go wrong. He knew that some people might try to take advantage of the reservation system for their own benefit, leaving the neediest behind. He stressed that it was crucial to make sure that the benefits of reservations reached the people who needed them the most. Ambedkar believed in being fair and making sure that the people who needed help the most were the ones who got it. He also believed in being open and honest about how reservations were being used so that any problems could be fixed quickly. A legacy of social justice: Ambedkar's enduring vision. So, Dr. Ambedkar saw reservations as a way to make India a fairer place for everyone, especially for those who had been treated badly for a long time. He believed that by giving extra help to those who needed it, India could become a more just and equal society. But his ultimate goal was to create a world where reservations were no longer necessary, a world without caste and inequality. Thank you for joining us today. What do you think? How can we work together to create a world where everyone has an equal chance to succeed? Let's talk about it in the comments below.